This is Evangelist Henry Walker. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. I want to start a new message today talking about, as far as our preparation for the rapture, we need to learn more about the power of His blood to overcome any possible spiritual landmines. But let's go to the Father in prayer first. Father, I thank you for another opportunity to minister to your people, Father. I ask you to use me just the way you want, Father. Let me say only what you want me to say, nothing more and nothing less. Help people, Father, to open up their spirits and not only receive the word, but study the word for themselves. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. Please turn with me to Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Again, we're talking about, as part of our preparation for, I believe, the soon coming rapture, we need to learn more about the power of His blood, the power of the Father's blood, to help us to overcome any possible spiritual landmines. The main requirement to using His blood, as I mentioned in every podcast, is to surrender everything to the Father, especially your flesh. Ask the Father to come into your spirit, fill you with His Spirit, mortify the deeds of your flesh, make you more and more like Yeshua on a daily basis, and bring the fruit of the Spirit out of your life. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. This is Romans 8, verse 13, and Galatians 5, verse 22 to 23. And when you do this, when you surrender everything to the Father, especially your flesh, then He puts you on that sanctification process, where every day He wants to work on your flesh, taking things out of your flesh, out of your life that shouldn't be there, and again, making you more and more like Yeshua. He puts you on that sanctification operating table. He's doing it with all of us. Just allow Him to do so, and watch. Every day you become more and more like Yeshua. This is a necessary process, is submitting everything to Him. And then He gives you the authority to call on His blood, to ask Him to cover situations that you face with His blood, especially these possible spiritual landmines. But Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock. This is Paul speaking, over which the Spirit of the Father had made you overseers to feed the church of the Father, which He has purchased with His own blood. So that blood that flowed through Yeshua, that blood that's still flowing today, is the Father's blood. We talked about it briefly on the last podcast, how we can use that blood as an offensive weapon, not just a defensive weapon. You can ask the Father to cover your family, your house, your property, your job, your finances, whatever He puts on your heart. Ask the Father to cover any meetings you might have at work before you ever had that meeting. You have any meetings with people who want to know more about Yeshua, ask the Father to cover that meeting with His blood again before you ever get there. Use it as an offensive weapon. His blood can bring about healing, physically, spiritually, mentally, and financially. Ask the Father to cover your body with His blood, for His blood to flow through your bloodstream, to take any impurities out. Say His blood over and over by faith. His blood can take away any anxiety, fear, worry, torment. Ask the Father to cover you with His blood and say it over and over. His blood can heal any past memories just like they never happened. If you haven't received the Spirit of the Father and the evidence of speaking in tongues, ask the Father to cover you with His blood and praise and worship Him and say the blood of Yeshua over and over. It'll free up your tongue and you'll be able to worship Him in spirit and truth. See, the first act of worship in the Word was when Abel offered up a burnt offering. asking Father to cover ourselves with his blood can enhance our worship of him, can bring us to a higher level of worship. And also on the original Passover in Egypt, his blood freed a whole nation. It liberated a whole nation. And if you need to be freed from anything that's coming against you, you can receive that freedom right now, that deliverance right now. Just receive it in the name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. We talked about in every podcast too, that if your flesh is giving you any worried thoughts, anxious thoughts, impure thoughts, just say out loud, thank you, Yeshua, that you had that crown of thorns around your head. That means my mind is protected by your blood. I only think your thoughts, and give those thoughts to the Father. His blood is so powerful. And so many people aren't making use of it, and so many people don't want to surrender everything to him as that main requirement. His blood can cleanse us spiritually. In Hebrews 9, verse 22, you can write it down. Hebrews 9, verse 22, the word says that almost all things are by the Lord purged with blood, his blood. And I mentioned on the previous podcast, to go through from Romans to Hebrews, ask the Father to show you certain scriptures that he wants you to confess, to cleanse you, to make you more and more like Yeshua. And when you get these scriptures checked off, before you say them, say, Father, I'm saying these scriptures for me, my family, and anybody else that you want to include, and I'm using the terms we, us, or are, O-U-R for us. So if you see scriptures where it says the just shall live by faith, you say, we are just, we live by faith. You put yourselves into these scriptures. We don't let any bitterness or wrath or clamor or evil speaking come out of our mouths. No weapon formed against us shall prosper. Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And before the Israelites went into battle, they would kill an animal, and so that blood was shed to ensure victory. And as I mentioned before, whatever the opportunity gives you, any encounter, or whatever he asks you to do, ask the Father to apply his blood over that situation. And he can give you victory. If you're in the ministry, and matter of fact, we're all in the ministry, Leviticus 8, verse 23, you can write it down, Leviticus 8, verse 23. Moses applied the blood on Aaron and his sons going into the ministry as the high priest. He applied the blood on the tip of their right ear, their right thumb, and upon the big toe of their right foot. We too need to ask the Father to apply his blood on the tip of our right ear, on our right thumb, and the big toe of our right foot, on the tip of our right ear, to hear his word, to hear his directions, to understand his word, to hear distinctly and clearly. And we need to ask him to apply his blood on the tip of our right hand, so we have more and more power in our lives through him and with him. And also, we need to ask him to apply the blood on the tip of our right toe, so we walk steadfast with him, as we walk with him and for him, never compromising, but walking again steadfast with him, unmovable with him, always abounding in his work. So remember to ask the Father to cover any situation you are facing with his blood. And as long as you're in that sanctification process with him, having surrendered everything to him, he could possibly move in a tremendous way for you. As we're in the book of Acts, let's go to Acts chapter 3. Let's see how the apostles faced spiritual landmines that were coming against them. Because as we serve the Father in these last days, we're in the world but not of the world, and there may be some spiritual landmines. And again, that's why it's so important to ask the Father to cover you with his blood and to face these spiritual landmines with his power and his wisdom and his knowledge. Acts chapter 3. As we go forth and allow him to work through us to help so many people, let's watch how the apostles dealt with these spiritual landmines. In Acts chapter 3, verse 1, Now, Peter and John went up together in the temple at the hour of prayer, being the ninth hour. And I mentioned this in a prior podcast. The ninth hour was 3 p.m. That's when Yeshua died. Remember, the day runs from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. are the 12 hours of the day that Yeshua talked about. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. are the 12 hours of the night, or the night watches. You can learn more about these night watches in my book Noon, on the bottom of my message page, the written message page at henrywalker.org. Also, you can learn about the feast days. As the Father works on you on a daily basis, He's going to take out, with your cooperation, any of this junk that came from Constantine, his doctrine, his form of Christianity, quote unquote, that you have allowed to be in your relationship with the Father through Yeshua. Remember, Yeshua is a Jew, was a Jew, always will be a Jew. We need to follow him in his feast days. Learn about his feast days. They're all about him. He's fulfilled every one of those feast days, with the exception of the last 3 during the year. The Feast of Trumpets, which is Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, or Tabernacle, Sukkot. So many major happenings happen on his feast days. Yeshua was born on Passover, died on Passover, circumcised on the last day of unleavened bread. Jericho came down on the last day of unleavened bread. Yeshua rose from the dead on the Feast of First Fruits, the first fruits from the dead. So the Father, again, with your cooperation, will take this junk out of your life that have pagan roots. You don't want those pagan things in your life. Most of the believers are following these pagan holidays and things from Constantine. He wanted pagans to come into his form of Christianity, so he brought some of their tradition in. They're worshiping 3 gods and so forth. I also have a book on the bottom of my message page called Is the Trinity Really a Mystery? Explaining the so-called mystery of the Trinity. They're both free at henrywalker.org on the bottom of the written message page. See, this ministry goes back to our Jewish roots in Yeshua. We don't go back to those washings and ceremonial laws or the 600 and some commandments that they can't keep. No, we go back to what Yeshua taught the apostles, what the apostles taught the others. And they were interrupted by Constantine and his junk. And most believers are following that, as I mentioned. But see, the road to hell is wide and many are found on it. The road to heaven is straight and narrow and few are found on it. We talked in the last podcast about being a remnant and the qualifications of the remnant. Get used to being in the minority. It's great to be in the minority. Yeshua was always in the minority. He had 12, back to 11, back to 12. Had 120 on the day of Pentecost that showed up, even though he appeared to 500 after his resurrection. He had 3,000 on the first day of Pentecost and 5,000 the next day. But that was a small number compared to the millions of people that were in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost. Now remember, Pentecost is a Jewish feast. Paul said, I have to get to Jerusalem for Pentecost. In John chapter 7, verse 37 to 53, Yeshua kept the Feast of Tabernacles. He showed that he's the living water on a Feast of Tabernacles. But this is all brought out in my book called Noon, and each of the feast days are explained on my website, again at henrywalker.org, and every one of those holidays are explained. The first message I have on there is when was Yeshua born, when did he die, when did he rise? It eliminates those 3 holidays that came into Constantine: Christmas, Easter, and Good Friday. He died on the middle of the week, Wednesday at 3 p.m., rose on Saturday, the Sabbath, at 3 p.m. They couldn't come to the tomb on a Sabbath. They didn't want to go near a dead body, so they missed him rising from the dead. The only ones that saw him rise from the dead are the keepers of the tomb. Remember, he said, I'm going to spend 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights, like Jonah spent in the whale's belly. 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours. So they came to the tomb sometime after 6 p.m. at the end of the Sabbath, and he already rose. It's all brought out in my message. And again, as I mentioned, he was born on Passover, died on Passover. Those pagan holidays all have pagan roots. Get them out of your life. The Father wants to deal with you if you still follow those holidays. It's tradition. 1,700 years of tradition from Constantine. Remember, Sabbath starts on Friday at 6 p.m. and ends on Saturday at 6 p.m. We have to get on his timing. The Sabbath is a beautiful time for him to finish that sanctification process that week and give us a brand new beginning for the beginning of the week, which is that Saturday at 6 p.m. It's important to be on his timing. So back in Acts chapter 3, verse 2, and a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms of them that entered into the temple. He saw Peter and John about to go into the temple and ask for alms. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, "Look on us." And he thought he was going to see some money, but he said in verse 6, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee. In the name of Yeshua of Nazareth, rise up and walk." And he took him by the right hand and lifted him up, and immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. And he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising the Father. And all the people saw him walking and praising the Father. And they knew that it was he which sat for alms at the beautiful gate of the temple, and they were filled with wonder and amazement at that which had happened unto them. And Peter preached the word, and Peter showed them why this happened through the name of Yeshua. And you may be faced with this type of situation, ministering to somebody, and the Father's using you, creating miracles. But in chapter 4, they were arrested. Chapter 4, verse 4, many believed, and the number of the men was about 5,000. This man never knew how to walk. Instantly, immediately, walking and leaping and praising the Father. They asked him, "What power, what name did you use?" And Peter, filled with the Spirit of the Father, said in verse 10, chapter 4, "Be it known unto you all and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Yeshua of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom the Father raised from the dead, even by him does this man stand here before you whole. This is the stone which was set in order of your builders, which has become the head of the corner." Remember, if they persecute the master of the house, they're going to persecute his servants. So don't be surprised when people come against you for ministering his word. But that landmine is not going to hurt you. The Father will get you around that landmine. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And every tongue that comes against you in judgment, you shall condemn. Why? Because you're his servant, and your righteousness is of him. Just don't fear. The Father hasn't given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. In verse 12, neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and perceived that they were unlearned and ignorant men, they marveled, and they took knowledge of them, that they had been with Yeshua. See, as you minister in these last days, people will see Yeshua coming out of you, ministering through you. In verse 18, and he called them and commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Yeshua. They can use any other name that they want, but not the name of Yeshua. But Peter and John said in verse 19, whether it be right in the sight of the Father to hearken unto you more than unto the Father, judge ye. For we cannot but speak the things which you have seen and heard. So here's a landmine which they walked around. They were not going to give in to the pressure of the world. See, again, we're in the world, but not of the world. The Father's moving on the world to help people to turn to him. So many people are putting their trust in almost anybody else but him. Politicians, the news media, you're not going to hear the truth on the news media. They're going to tell you what they want you to hear, to control. It's all about control. Peacefully, stand strong. And having done all, stand. Having your loins girded about with truth. Having on a breastplate of righteousness. Having your feet shod with the preparation of the word of peace. Having a helmet of salvation, which is his word. And above all, have the shield of faith, where you can quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. Stand strong in these last days. And like a tree planted by the rivers of water, don't be moved. After they were threatened, they came to Yeshua. And they wanted more signs and wonders to be done. In chapter 5, verse 12, and by the hands of the apostles were many signs and wonders wrought among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. And of the rest does no man join himself to them, but the people magnify them. Get ready for the Father to use you. As he takes you around these spiritual landmines, he's going to use you tremendously. Look at Daniel in a lion's den, could not touch him. Look at the 3 Hebrew children and the fiery furnace, even being turned up 7 times hotter, it didn't hurt them. See, nothing can hurt you in these last days. Stand strong for him. And every potential landmine, he'll take you right around it. And again, no weapon formed against you shall ever prosper. His word will never come back void in our lives. It always accomplishes what he sets it out to do. Stand on his word, stand on his blood, stand on his name. Again, ask him to cover you with his blood. If you surrender everything to the Father and you're on that sanctification process, that blood will protect you from any circumstance that comes your way, no matter who brings it. Remember, everything was created by the Father and for the Father, and by him all things consist. In verse 14, chapter 5, Acts, and believers were the more added to Yeshua, multitudes both of men and women, insomuch that they brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that at the least the shadow of Peter passing by might overshadow some of them. That was the least of the miracles, because they stood for his name and his blood and his word. There came also a multitude out of the cities round about Jerusalem, bringing sick folks, and them which were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed every one. So after that, they were put in prison, and the Father freed them. He said, don't worry, nothing can stop you but yourself, because greater is the Father in you than anything or anybody in the world. I say that at the end of every podcast, because I want you to focus in on that the greater one lives within you. The one who created everything lives within you. In Acts chapter 12, you may be in a situation where you feel like you're in prison. But look at Peter. He's in prison, and Herod killed James, the brother of John, with the sword, and he's getting ready to kill Peter. It says in chapter 12, verse 3, and because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. This is the Passover season. Verse 4, and when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending, it says Easter, but that's bad. The Greek word is Pasch, it's Passover, to bring him forth to the people. In verse 5, Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the congregation unto the Father for him. When Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. Remember the last chapter of the Gospel of John. Yeshua said, when they take you where you don't want to be, Peter, just remember, follow me. And here's Yeshua coming in there. In verse 7, and a light shined in the prison, and he smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And Yeshua said, gird yourself, and bind on your sandals. And so he did. And he said unto him, cast your garment about you, and follow me. He followed Yeshua. In these last days, follow Yeshua. Whatever he asks you to do, he is working with you and through you. And again, no weapon formed against you shall ever prosper. In verse 10, and when they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. The gate had to open for Peter, because Yeshua was leading him. Any opportunities that Yeshua has for you, he will go ahead of you and open those doors. Like he told Cyrus, I'm opening those 2-leaved gates unto you. And the gates shall not be shut. They shall be open day and night. And I'll go before you and make the crooked places straight and the rough places smooth. And I'll give you the treasures of darkness and the hidden riches of secret places. He said that to Cyrus, and he's saying that to us. He'll open the gates for us. Follow him and his word. Get rid of this Constantine junk. Follow him and our Jewish heritage in him. Constantine wanted to get everything Jewish out of what the early believers taught, he did a good job, but the Father is restoring that back to his body. Like he said in Ezekiel 37, verse 15 to 17. He wants to open up the eyes of the Jews to Yeshua and open up believers' eyes to our Jewish roots in Yeshua and making them one stick together. Remember, there's 12 gates going into heaven. It's for the 12 tribes of Israel. We are all physically or spiritually from one of those tribes. Reading verse 10 again. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord. Again, because of Peter following Yeshua. Yeshua opened up the gate, and Peter followed, and passed on to one street. And forthwith, Yeshua departed from him. And maybe you're facing a situation right now, you feel like you're in prison, but in the name of Yeshua, by his blood, be free. Right now, immediately. Nothing can stop his word from going forth. If we don't follow the Father, we can't stop it. If we say no, he always has a ram in the bush to minister his word. We ever see the number 2 in the word? It's all about, he always has a ram in the bush to do what he's asking us to do if we don't do it. Also, the meaning of the number 2 is that we're not doing it alone. He is with us, and he is doing it through us. So before we get back to the message, I want to remind some of you that this is a pro-life ministry. We believe that life begins at conception. The Father is the agent of conception. I want to pray for the babies in the womb. I do that in every podcast. And remember, the babies in the womb, around 18 days, their heart begins to beat. At around 4 months, the baby in the womb, their hearts are pumping about 25 quarts of blood per day. That baby is alive. We want to pray for the babies in the womb right now. Father, touch the babies in the womb right now, Father. I ask you to bring them to a full birth. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. But I can feel them touching those babies right now. And if any of you had an abortion, repent, ask the Father to forgive you, and go on following him into your purpose and destiny, and don't look back, because that baby or babies are with Yeshua right now. So again, as we close, we're talking about taking advantage of his blood, asking him to cover us with his blood, especially as we may face some spiritual landmines as we serve him. So I want to pray for you right now before we close. Put your hand on a computer, on your cell phone. Father, I ask you to touch them, Father, from the top of their heads to the soles of their feet. Make them whole, Father, in your name, the mighty name of Yeshua, by your blood. By your stripes they were healed. Touch people in their hearts. Open up every valve, every artery. Touch people in their minds. Take whatever is not of you out of their bodies. Right now, Father, by your blood. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yeshua, by the blood of Yeshua. And remember to next time, this is Evangelist Henry Walker say, greater is the Father in you, your daddy, the King of the universe, than anything or anybody in the world.